have wondered if heart attacks could be an issue because it is a shock to the body when you walk into a cold shower. I don't know, when you did those plunges, did you sort of slowly go in or did you go in all at once because it's easier that way?
No, I go all in all at once. For me, if I do the gradual process where I'm just dipping a toe in, literally just dipping a toe in, the feedback that my mind will give me is danger, 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 do not do this. So I do it because I want to override that fear response and the danger signals that my brain is telling me. And I'm grateful. I'm like, thank you so much for those signals. You're working. Excellent. And we're going to go and do this. And so I will literally just go right in. Hello, friends. It is Jason Wrobel here with the illustrious Alexandra Paul on the Switch for Good podcast. We're excited to bring you another episode where we take a deep dive into health, wellness, questions, myths, as we examine how to live a healthy, happy, thriving life. So today we're going to be diving into the topics of antibiotics. Are they good for you? Can you overdo them? What's the deal with taking them? The second topic we're going to dive into, which is a very, very hot topic right now, which I actually did 4 days ago. It's cold plunging and contrast therapy. We're going to dive into, is there any supportive research behind it? Is it a fad? Does it do anything great to the body? And then we are going to talk about our top 5 tips for a happy, healthy life. Thanks for joining us on the Switch for Good podcast. Alexandra, always good to see you. How are you?
Nice to see you, Jason. Well, I'm feeling better. I got sick, which made me think about the antibiotics because I have this cough. And yeah, so I wanted to talk about it because people are confused about the good and the bad and how to deal with antibiotics. So I wanted to give a little bit of history, then talk about some of the problems with antibiotic use, overuse, and then give some solutions if you have to take antibiotics. So as we know, antibiotics are medicines that will save our lives. They kill bacteria really quickly before the bacteria can overtake your system and kill you. Now, the first antibiotic was, interestingly, it was used in first one that was used in medicine was called salvarsan, and it treated syphilis, and it was just 110 years ago, starting in 1910. It was first used, yeah, and there was a problem with it, though, which happens with a lot of medicines. It was also very toxic to humans, so it was eventually replaced by the antibiotic we all know of called penicillin, which changed medicine. That was discovered in 1928 by an English guy named Alexander Fleming, and he was away on vacation. He came back. This kind of story happens a lot. I feel like people are away on vacation. They go check their Petri dishes when they come home. And that's what happened here. And he saw that there was this mold in some of the Petri dishes, and there was no bacteria around the mold. And so he looked at this, what he called mold juice, and he realized that it could kill a whole bunch of penicillin, a whole bunch of bacteria, not just the staphylococcus that he was growing in the Petri dishes. And he called it penicillin. I'm not really sure why. The problem was it was really hard to isolate. And in 1941, they used it on the first human. It was a man who'd been gardening, and this is why gardening could be lethal. He'd cut himself with a rose bush along his mouth, and he'd gotten these really bad infections all over his body. And so they gave him some of this penicillin, and he recovered. But the problem was they didn't have enough, and the bacteria came back, and he ended up dying. So they realized that this stuff works, but they need more of it. And the war was going on in the early 1940s for Europe and in England. So they couldn't really concentrate on dealing with penicillin. They had a war to fight. So they took it to the Americans and said, hey, can you help us develop this? And the Americans did. The Americans made it so that you could mass produce penicillin, and it was used throughout World War II to save soldiers' lives because they would often die of sepsis in the battlefield after getting wounded, right?
Yeah.
So awesome. So antibiotics are amazing. There's a little bit of a problem with them, which we discovered, is that when you try and kill bacteria, if you don't wipe them out pronto, just like the guy who was pruning his rose bushes and got the scratch, if you don't wipe them out, they will come back, they'll mutate into something that is resistant to the antibiotic. And in effect, they come back stronger. And this is called antibiotic resistance. And it's a really serious phenomenon. It's created these, what we call superbugs, for which we have no remedy, no antibiotic. And there are 48,000 deaths a year that are attributed to infections that we cannot treat because we don't have the antibiotics to treat them because of these superbugs.
Is that statistic of 48 US or worldwide?
Oh, sorry, yes, it's in the United States. Thank you for clarifying. 48,000 in the United States. And now in the United States, we overprescribed antibiotics to humans. 1 out of 4 antibiotics prescribed in this country are unnecessary. And I've seen a lot of this when I was a kid. You know, you go in and you have a cold or something, and they give you a pill, and a lot of times the pill's the antibiotic. And so there's this dance that we have to use antibiotics sometimes, but we can't do it if it's not absolutely necessary, because otherwise we're creating bacteria for which we have no medicines. All right. So strep throat, UTIs, some UTIs, ear infections and sinus infections need antibiotics, but not all of them. The only way to diagnose it is you have to take a swab. And a lot of times we'll go into the doctor's office with the flu, which is a virus, which is not killed by antibiotics. And we'll get something like a Z-Pack. That's right?
Yeah.
And it's completely useless because no one's checked whether what you have is a virus or a bacteria. So, and there's a danger for you if you keep doing that, is that your body will develop a resistance to, let's say, Keflex, if the doctor gives you Keflex, and you won't, next time when you really need Keflex for a certain problem, you will be resistant to it. So each of us on a personal level have to really be judicious about the antibiotics that we take. There's this, you've probably heard of C. diff. Have you heard of C. diff, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's this superbug, and it kills a lot of Americans, especially when they're in the hospital. So you can go into the hospital for something and you can get the C. diff bacteria, and it can really kill you. I think one of the ways that they fight it actually is fecal transplants. And vegans are the best fecal transplants, by the way. We had a doctor on talking about that because, and I'll speak later why our feces is so powerful against bacteria. But you really, if you're in the hospital, you have to be insistent that the doctor and the nurses wash their hands before they come near you. Otherwise, you could die of something that you didn't even go into the hospital for. And that's hard to do because the white coat syndrome, we all feel like, oh, we can't bother them. They're taking care of us. We're so grateful. But no, make sure that they are washing their hands. Plus, a lot of doctors, I think they've stopped wearing ties. But one thing they found in hospitals, this is just an aside, that doctors' ties, if they're male, they will lean over onto a patient and their tie will touch the patient, and then they'll go to another room and their tie will lean over and touch another patient, and that was spreading bacteria.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? So don't tell your doctor to take the tie off if they're male. So I had an experience with a resistant bacteria. It was called MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And what happened was I had this little pimple, and then it became an abscess all of a sudden, like overnight. And it was a weekend. So I went to the ER and they drained it. Oh my God, and packed it. It was so painful. And they told me to go to my primary doctor and just check, just do a follow-up with my primary doctor on the weekday. And I did, amazingly, because normally I would just go, no, you gave me an antibiotic. I'll just take that and everything will be fine. But I went to my doctor, and my doctor insisted on taking a swab, and checked it and said, oh, no, this medicine that they gave you, this antibiotic is not going to work at all because you have MRSA, which is pretty much resistant to most antibiotics except for doxycycline, so he gave me doxycycline. And it went away. I actually had that bacteria in me for years. I would get a pimple and it would become an abscess. I'd have to take doxycycline. Yeah. So it was quite a battle. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very curious with these abscesses that you were having, because they were recurring and you were having to take multiple rounds of doxycycline, I mean, how many rounds do you think you did before it went away? And has it gone away?
Yes, it has. We have apparently a little bit of this MRSA in us all. It's a nose swab. And I remember going to the dermatologist and her saying I was pretty much over it. And I haven't had, I think it was 3 years, 4 years. I would get, mostly what would happen was it would be in an area where like a bra strap or a bikini, right at my bikini line, like on my butt. That's where it started. Just where something might rub a little bit. And it would just start rubbing and then it would get infected. And that's how it was. So I began to notice as soon as I had a little pimple in a weird place that I should take some doxycycline. I probably took, 10 rounds.
Wow,
Well,
10 rounds.
Lots over the years. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about what to do when you have to take antibiotics.
I was just about to ask in terms of recovery and how we replenish after 10 cycles. So please go down that path.
Okay. So if you do, and then I also want to talk on a larger level, because there's some other things that we can do to help the world and this help with not be part of the overprescribing of antibiotics. But so we've been learning a lot in the last year, 10 years maybe, about how antibiotics are bad for you because when they go in, they kill not only the bacteria that they are aiming for, but also a lot of good bacteria in our microbiome. So we're just starting to kind of understand the importance of the microbiome. So some people were recommending that we take a probiotic when we take an antibiotic. And one doctor said, whom we had on the show, said no, because then you're stopping the action of the antibiotic and you don't want to do that. What I think is now is that the general idea is that, you can take a probiotic while you're taking an antibiotic, and you should definitely take one after you take the antibiotic. But the problem is a probiotic doesn't have very many bacteria. I mean, very diverse bacteria in it. And you need a really big diversity of bacteria to have a healthy microbiome. So yes, some doctors will say that it actually might slow your recovery to a healthy microbiome because it'll lodge all this like lactobacillus, but not the other kinds that you need. So the best thing to do if you want a healthy gut after during and after antibiotics is to eat a lot of plants and fermented foods with live active cultures, because not all fermented foods, I guess, have live active cultures. So make sure that they say that. And maybe you can talk to that, Jason, but plant foods with fiber, because those will feed all sorts of different bacteria and make them strong and inhabit your gut so that it'll go back to normal, and it'll start going back to normal right away, but it could take months if you've been taking antibiotics. So that is how to restore. But there's another way too, and that is, and people are really concerned about this and might not know that 80% of our antibiotics in the United States are fed to farm animals. Now, why
80%?
is that? 80% of all the antibiotics produced in the US is fed to our farm animals. Isn't that amazing? So this, of course, is a huge issue in terms of bacteria resistance, right? Because we're feeding so much and we're doing it in a way that is super bad, because we feed these animals antibiotics because in factory farming, they're raised so close together in such dirty and stressful conditions that they could easily be overcome with lots of diseases and pass them around like crazy when they are in these barns, in these terrible places. So they feed them a low level of antibiotics on a daily basis in their water or their feed. And this kind of keeps bacteria at bay, but it does kind of what happened with the gentleman who scratched himself in the roses back in the 1940s. It will kill some of them, but not really wipe them out. In other words, they'll get even stronger because of the way that we're feeding them constantly this low level of antibiotics. It's really, really terrible. And what I found interesting in my research on this because there's campaigns to try and get doctors to understand that it's called an antimicrobial campaign stewardship campaign to try and get doctors not to just prescribe willy-nilly these antibiotics, but really where the issue is in the farm animal, in the ag business, right? So, but there's a little, as always, the way that they're doing it in factory farms is terrible because it's a low dose every day that encourages bacterial resistance. But if you are eating meat and you're feeling good about yourself because you eat organic meat where there is antibiotics are not allowed at all, and if an animal gets sick, you cannot feed that animal antibiotics, or you have to pull them out of the organic stream, and either you lose the money or you put them in the non-organic stream if you have a non-organic business. But what happens is a lot of farmers won't take care of their animals when they get sick with antibiotics, and sometimes we need antibiotics. So not having antibiotics at all in allowing our farm animals to take them when they're sick is not a good idea either, because it can be cruel. So it's the best thing to do is just not get involved with animal ag at all. That is that's my theory on that. So the upshot is that you should avoid antibiotics if you can. Push back on your doctor if they hand you antibiotics, and make sure they've done a swab and know that it's bacteria. And don't eat meat, because when you eat meat too, actually, you also get the antibiotics that the animals were fed on a low level in your body. So you're developing resistance to those antibiotics.
Wow. Okay. So it's a double whammy. It's the overprescription in the medical community, and it's also people eating animal flesh and getting those low doses being transferred over and over and over. That's really interesting. It makes me wonder too about the research and if there's any progress around these superbugs whatsoever. I mean, it's interesting to think that science has developed so many remedies and so many solutions, but yet when this mutated superbug emerges, there's really nothing that we can do about it. That's pretty frightening to consider.
And the best thing we could do is stop feeding antibiotics en masse to factory farmed animals. And if we do that, we probably have to stop factory farming because animals won't survive. Oh, there's another reason, by the way. Oh, I forgot to say this, is that another reason that farmers, I don't even like to call them farmers, but people who raise animals on these factory facilities, they feed them antibiotics because it makes the animals grow to market weight faster, which means that if you take antibiotics, you also will tend to gain weight. So that is an interesting side effect that I think a lot of people don't know about. And a big reason that they're used in factory farms is because, they get to fatten those animals up and kill them sooner and turn them over sooner, and so they can make more money.
Wow. It's a complex issue, isn't it? Because what you're talking about is dismantling an entire giant system of our food industry that is, creating tens of billions of dollars in profit. And then you're having, though, these very deleterious long-term health concerns with humans that are consuming animal products. This is a big one. This is a big one to bite off, right? Because there's so many layers to it.
And it's scary because when we get sick, we just want to go away. We're afraid. I mean, when I had this cough, I thought, I wonder if it's going to go to my lungs, and then I'm going to get pneumonia, and then I'm going to get this and that. And you just want to take a pill so it'll go away.
Yeah. That's always an interesting thing too, as an aside. When I start not feeling well, there's been a few moments that I can recall, even in the past few years, where I wasn't feeling well. Either I had some sort of what felt like a sinus infection or mucus or things going on, and thinking, well, do I just wait this out? Or is it bad enough where I'm going to go in and then they might prescribe antibiotics? So there's been a few times where I've actually just wrote out whatever I was feeling, not knowing what it was. And I'm not saying that as a recommendation. I'm not a medical professional. Do not take that as medical advice. However, because of what you're elucidating, Alexandra, this overprescribing, overconsumption of antibiotics, I tend to wait until things get really bad before I consider that option. I don't want to be preemptive about it, is what I'm trying to say. And that's a tough thing to assess.
Well, you probably do other things to help yourself get better,
I do.
right?
I do.
So that's important because I know if we go to the doctor, they scare the Jesus out of us if we don't take the antibiotics, and how bad it could be. And so that then we take them and feel like we had to, but maybe we didn't.
Yeah, but to your point, to go back to something you said of determining whether it's a virus or a bacteria, that's a crucial distinction. Whereas with viral stuff, I've got stuff like lysine and oil of oregano. I'll take high doses of zinc, vitamin C, antioxidants. I have my natural remedies that I'll take when I'm not feeling well. Lots of hydration, of course. But bacteria is that's a different animal. I mean, usually viruses are things that I find I can knock out pretty quickly through holistic remedies, but bacteria is a whole nother. Yeah. I don't know how I would even mess with that naturally in my cabinet, which is right behind me for anybody watching on YouTube. It's just stock full of supplements. It's like I've got a whole apothecary in there, but not for bacteria.
Right. And it's about maybe, you don't know if the bacteria is going to hit that point where now it's taken over and you've got sepsis or something,
Right.
infection. I mean, yeah. So I used an antibiotic ointment because I cut myself cleaning my blender. It was really dumb. But anyway, and I didn't put anything on it for the first day. And then it got red and infected and I had to put an antibacterial, which I guess that's part of the whole thing. It's not only popping pills as we put it on our cuts and everything, but and then it did go down within a day. So it really did work. So I needed it then.
Yeah, I think it's like when we really need it, let's use it.
Yeah.
But let's not overuse it or overexpose ourselves to it. Yeah.
Right. So, okay, you're going to talk about something I've had questions about, which is cold plunge. And is it good for us? Could it be bad for us? And you said you did it a few days ago.
Yeah. So I was in my Northern California journey, of which I just got back to Los Angeles. I was up there for the last 5 weeks. There's a really wonderful community and event space. It's a membership club called the Portal. It's in Mill Valley, and they have a bunch of really wonderful events, speakers, and they also have a sort of wellness space downstairs with a beautiful yoga room. They've got saunas and cold plunges, a whole bunch of holistic products. It's very, very cool. So I was there with a couple of friends that I hang out with, guys in my men's group, and they invited me to do some contrast therapy. So I want to talk a little bit about cold plunging and then also what contrast therapy is. And cold plunging is basically where you put your body into very cold water. This is something that people have been doing for a while, and the massive popularity of this on social media in the past few years is, watching the videos of people, half frozen in lakes in winter, and people shelling out thousands of dollars for high-end cold plunge tubs, has inspired a demand for more scientific evidence behind this. And there are some research out there who has studied cold exposure in terms of performance and how to survive in harsh climates, but not necessarily the therapeutic benefits. But apparently there's a lot of claims out there, but there's not a ton of papers on this. So when we talk about cold plunging, or some people call it ice dipping, they're just starting now to see evidence in terms of the therapeutic benefits. There's a couple of researchers working on this, one of which is a cold water swimmer, which is very cool. And we can link to these articles in the show notes. When they ask them about sort of what cold can do for you, it really depends on the type of exposure, the duration that you're in the cold water, the intensity of the water. There's a very different sort of factors that play into this. Comparing apples to oranges. But one thing scientists do know about this is that cold is, one of our most potent natural stressors, right? And it means that the physiological responses in our body are always going to be extremely strong to being in the cold. So, especially when you introduce water in the mix, where you get the sapping of heat from our body more quickly than air. So you've got the cold air, you've got the cold water. And so there's not a single definition of what cold plunging is, but the water temperatures generally range between 60 degrees Fahrenheit to way colder than that. For example, a lot of people go to Washington, to Seattle, to Puget Sound to do this in the water, and water temperatures there can be like the mid 40s, way colder. And so in this literature that is just emerging, they have more information on the risks of cold water exposure than the upside. So some of the risks, depending on the individual, are cardiac arrest, drowning, hypothermia. However, what they are showing in some cases now with the emerging research is there may be benefits to the immune system, to inflammation reduction, and even our mental health. Now, these are hypotheses, right? A lot of the randomized controlled trials on cold plunging are pretty small control groups, and they're not well controlled, and they often focus on like healthy young men, so it's not representative of a large swath of the population. So interesting. There's one claim out there that's being tested right now, which is, can cold plunging be a tool for regulating your blood sugar? So acute and repeated cold exposure has been found to improve insulin sensitivity, which helps you manage your blood sugar. And that's, multiple studies have found this, which is cool. Now, here's the catch, Alexandra. I want to see if you can guess what the catch is. There's one physiological action that needs to happen in your body to get the most benefit in terms of blood sugar regulation. Can you guess what it is?
Oh my gosh, blood sugar. This is something that has to happen with the cold plunge?
Yeah, while you're in the cold plunge, this is a physiological reaction that happens to the body that seems to point to the most benefits for blood sugar regulation. I'm just curious if you want to take
I
a
don't
stab
know.
at it.
Your heart rate has to go really low.
Good guess.
Oh no.
It's not that. It appears that your body needs to shiver to get the
Oh,
most benefit, because as you're activating your muscles through shivering, it's causing these responses, which is really fascinating. So in that sense, being in cold water can be its own kind of workout, right? From the shivering and the body, moving in that way. So that's very, very interesting to see. The other claim that they're looking at is boosting our immunity. So in these cold plunging groups, it's like, it's going to help you, prevent you from getting sick. It's going to help the immune system. The evidence for this claim is less clear. There have been some research papers that have shown changes to white blood cells. Other studies have not, but suggesting that perhaps the immune system could be better equipped to deal with infections. Interesting.
when you say changes in white blood cells, does that mean someone has fewer or more? More white blood cells, right? Because that's what fights infection.
Yeah, it's the increase of white blood cells, correct.
Got it.
Yeah. But again, the studies, athletic young men doing this kind of study. So we always have to take these with a grain of salt of looking at, who's involved in these studies. So the biological significance of this one in terms of immunity remains to be elucidated. There's not enough on this. It's still a hypothesis because there's just not enough research out there. One of the more promising real world studies came out of the Netherlands, though. Scientists there, they were doing basically like a hot shower and then a 30, 60, or 90-second cold shower, which I'll go into contrast therapy in a minute. That's contrast therapy, is contrasting hot and cold, hot and cold. So the participants who took a cold rinse after the hot shower had a 29% reduction in sickness absences from work, but not in the actual number of days they felt ill. That feels a little amorphous in terms of reporting to me. That's interesting. I'm like, okay, they had less sickness absences, but not the number of days they felt ill. That feels a
Oh,
little
so maybe
flimsy to me.
they just didn't feel as sick, so they didn't have to leave work.
Probably so. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And the other one that I mentioned previously is chronic inflammation.
Yeah.
So there was a study that surveyed 700 outdoor swimmers about its perceived effects. And a quarter of these swimmers in this survey were using cold plunging for things like fibromyalgia, arthritis, IBS, things that were related to inflammation in the body. And some studies are showing that there are a release of anti-inflammatory markers doing cold exposure. That's really interesting. I'm going to dive into this a little bit deeper right now.
That kind of makes sense because when you have a swelling on your knee or something, you use an ice pack. So this is basically a
Right.
big ice pack for your body.
It's a big ice pack for your body. Exactly. So it's apparently residual markers of in terms of inflammation show an increase, like I said, white blood cell count and a reduction in cytokines. So that's, again, more research needed on this, but there's interesting. There's also demonstration that there's a delay in the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Very cool.
Yeah.
The last one that I want to touch on here too for now is an antidote to anxiety and depression. So, although evidence on mental health benefits in depression and mood in this mostly come from anecdotes, researchers do see it as promising. Two lead researchers were looking at, again, cold water swimming as a therapeutic intervention for anxiety and depression. That is not going to launch, though, this study until next year. And that's going to have more than 400 people. But there was a pilot study of 50 people that experienced improvements in their mental health and their depressive symptoms after 8 sessions of cold plunging. That's really interesting. So for me, I know, it's again, there are these other variables that are hard to account for, right? Is it part of doing it as a social activity, like I did with the 2 guys I was with? Is it being in a beautiful setting like nature, like the Puget Sound or in a cold lake in Michigan? It's hard to say and isolate those factors because if community is present, connection is present, it's really interesting. The other thing too that they're noticing is there's an acute hormonal response, specifically with the release of adrenaline and noradrenaline, which kind of gives people potentially that high after. And I know that, like, after I got done out of the cold plunging, I literally felt, I felt amazing. I felt just clear and present. My body felt full of energy. And then lastly, we've talked about dopamine in previous episodes and that being sort of the neurotransmitter that's responsible for motivation. There's one study that showed a 250% increase in dopamine levels in the human bloodstream after an hour of cold water immersion. That's a long time. Being in the cold water for an hour, that's wild. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm reading that incorrectly.
Oh,
They tested the dopamine levels in the bloodstream an hour after cold water immersion.
okay. Because usually
So
it's about at most 10 minutes, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So dopamine does increase in the cold. So that's really interesting to see what's out there. And I want to say for me, I really love contrast therapy, which I mentioned is hot, cold, hot, cold. There's not as much research out there, but the ones that they have looked at are in terms of sort of sporting teams and athletes to aid recovery.
Mm.
And they have kind of insufficient evidence around that in terms of doing this in sports settings or, you know, how this helps athletes. There's one study in particular they did on elite female athletes where they did alternating water therapy. So they were going back 14-minute recovery intervals between hot and cold, hot and cold. And apparently, no significant differences were noticed in agility after these sessions. Perceptions of recovery were superior, though. That's interesting. So agility in terms of how they move, they didn't see any difference in that. But their recovery time looked like it was accelerated from doing contrast therapy. So I
Mm.
realized that was a lot. For me, I always go back to, and I know I've mentioned this previously, we're always looking at evidence. We're always looking at the latest studies, which is always a fascinating thing to dig into. But I think it always comes down to, do you feel better as a result? I mean, I know for me, when I do this and I do cold therapy and hot therapy, I feel amazing afterward. I feel fantastic. And I walk through my day very differently, just very calm,
Mm.
very peaceful, feeling very resourced. So I realize that's strictly anecdotal. but I feel a palpable difference. And I'm curious, Alexandra, in all the time in your wellness journey, have you done the cold plunge thing? Have you done saunas? What's your experience with this?
My only experience with saunas was what I talked about last week when I was
Right.
detoxing. So I had that, and I've never liked the wait. What is there's the dry. The dry is the sauna, right? Because that's what we did in the
Well,
detoxing.
there's dry and wet saunas. There's
Okay,
both.
so the wet ones I like better because I feel like I sweat, but the dry, I never go into a dry sauna except for back then when I was doing that detox program. Um, I have only so one of my closest friends struggles with depression, and he has a cold plunge tub, and he swears by it. He swears that it makes him feel better. I have only used just cold showers, and I feel like I feel better, but it might be because I feel so good that I'm doing it, and then that I'm out of it. When you're done, you're like, "Woo, did
The
that?
relief.
Aren't I
Yeah.
amazing?" And now I'm not in it, and I feel great. So hard to know, but it makes sense to me about the anti-inflammatory effects, just because of what I said about the ice pack. It just makes sense. However, I have wondered if heart attacks could be an issue because it is a shock to the body when you walk into a cold shower. I don't know, when you did those plunges, did you sort of slowly go in, or did you go in all at once because it's easier that way?
No, I go all in all at once.
Yes.
Yeah. For me, if I do the gradual process where I'm
Mm,
just dipping a toe in, literally just dipping a toe in,
yeah,
the feedback that my mind will give me is danger,
sure.
danger, danger. Do not do this.
Right.
So I do it because I want to override that fear response
Mm.
and the danger signals that my brain is telling me. And I'm grateful. I'm like, thank you so much for those signals. You're working. Excellent. And we're going to go and do this. And so I will literally just go right in. And I find that deep rhythmic belly breathing really just, like, and almost like that ujjayi breath. If anyone's into yoga or listening, that really like deep exhalation is tremendously helpful. So don't get in and hold your breath. We don't want to do that.
I think that, yeah, I start gasping. But now, do you put your head under? Because when I'm in the
Sometimes.
okay, yeah, when I'm in the
Mhm.
shower, I have to put my head under for it to really be effective, and on the back of my neck.
That's what I was just about to say, is the back of the neck feels like the spot where something changes. There's some biological response when the cold water hits, same as me, the back of the neck. That's like, oh, wow. And it's interesting you talk about it because to me, it's such a way to strengthen. I don't know, strengthen my will, strengthen my
Mhm.
resilience by being in cold water, because I wouldn't call it fun. I don't know that I enjoy. I mean, I guess I do enjoy it on some level, but it's just it's a good mental and physiological test.
Okay, well, I'm going to be interested to see if there's heart attack risk or any other risks that come out of the test, because I think that's serious. That's a serious ramification. So we should know about those more. We don't
Yeah.
hear about those as much.
Exactly. And I want to say we're not medical professionals dispensing this as advice or to try it. If one is curious about this and has something like cardiovascular issues, you would consult with your doctor before you go and jump in a frozen lake in the middle of winter.
Did you know that as we age, our bodies produce less collagen? This vital protein that keeps our skin firm and supports muscles and joints starts to dwindle, leaving us with a few more laugh lines and a bit less bounce in our step. But there's good news. Yes. With vegan collagen, you can naturally replenish this essential building block and get your glow back. Through innovative extraction techniques from nutrient-rich broccoli and carrots, they've crafted 100% plant-based collagen that effectively reduces the signs of aging. It supports skin hydration, enhances joint flexibility, and strengthens hair and nails, so you can look and feel fabulous. And the best part, there are no chemicals, no preservatives, and absolutely no animal products, just pure plant-based goodness. So stay youthful, stay active, and choose Veg Collagen. elevate your daily routine and let nature help you shine from the inside out. You're just going to go to vegnutrition.com. That is VEDGE nutrition.com and use code S, the number 4G for 30% off. Right? You got it. One more time, vegnutrition.com and use code S4G for 30% off your order. Now back to the episode.
Okay, so, well, I want to talk, it sounds like this is what you were talking about, cold plunge. Contrast therapy might be a good way to help us be happier and healthier. I wanted to give I don't know if they're my top tips, but they're integral to my life that I feel have been important to making me healthy and happy. They might not apply to everybody, but I wanted to share them. They're not exactly what you would think of when you think of it. So, I'd like to hear your thoughts, Jason. So my first recommendation, a tip to staying healthy and happy, especially, is saying no. Now, this is a weird one because most people are like, yes, say yes. It's like cool to say yes all the time.
Yeah.
Well, not for people like I who are sort of people pleasers. This learning to say no probably saved my life, both physically and emotionally.
Wow.
And yeah. And that's because as a young woman, I wanted to be nice to people all the time. And I thought that meant saying yes to what they wanted, who they wanted me to be. And so I started just saying, yes, I'll do this and doing what other people wanted and not asserting myself at all because I thought that was not nice. And in the end, what it meant was that I was nice to everybody except for myself. I was not being nice to me. And this triggered my eating disorder because from 16 to 28, because I was out of control. I wasn't being authentic to myself. I was trying to please everyone. So I'd come home and I'd binge to kind of treat myself. And I just feel like that wasn't until I learned to set boundaries and say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go out, and not worrying if people like me or not. That I stopped being bulimic. It was amazing. I used to feel this, and I've talked about this before. I used to feel this heavy kind of a pain in my upper chest that would be the sign that I wanted to binge. And it would be because I wanted to fill it with food so I wouldn't be uncomfortable anymore. But I have not had that feeling maybe half a dozen times in the last 32 years. Pretty good. And that's because I'm really clear about my boundaries and I say no. So when you take care of yourself by setting your own boundaries, then you don't need to do things like I did, like overeat, because overeating is generally an emotional thing. But if you're taking care of yourself emotionally and, doing more of what you want in your life, then you won't feel a need to overeat. So that's for me was a huge tip because I really feel like until I began to say no. And by the way, people didn't dislike me for saying no, which is what my biggest fear was. They were just like, oh, okay. Because I wasn't, it's okay. They went on with their life and I went on with mine, et cetera, et cetera.
That's interesting, Alexandra, because I think one of the primary fears in people-pleasing behavior is if I don't gain this person's approval and affection and love or maintain it once I've got it, that means rejection, or that means abandonment, or that means some sort of death, really. And so it's interesting that you decided to take a different tack in your life and say, no, I'm gonna show up and be authentic and be myself, and people will respond how they respond, and be willing to take that risk,
Yeah. And what they did was they ended up respecting me more because they could just sense my boundary and they were like, oh, okay. Generally they were okay. That's cool. They knew where they stood instead of me sort of ambivalently going into things and doing things I didn't really want to do, or being around people I didn't really want to be around. And I was able to set those. So anyway, that's to me was so important. Especially in this era of where people go, you should just say yes. I find for me, that would not be good. So the second tip I have is once again, very personal. And it is, don't do that one thing. And we usually have one thing that sort of starts a cascade of not great things in our day or our life. And for me, that's eating processed sugar. I just, once I start eating sugar, then I'm happy for a moment, and then I start not feeling good because I don't eat healthy food. I don't look as good. I wake up not feeling good. I'm not as confident. I'm not as zen. I'm not as patient. It just kind of ruins things. And some people might say, "Oh, Alexandra, don't be so strict. You deserve to have a little treat." Well, yes. I mean, I can find other ways to feel treated, because sugar ends up not being fun. And
Hmm.
it ends up affecting my life negatively more than it is positive. So that's my one thing. I mean, for other people, it might be don't date alcoholics, or stop scrolling through social media after 9, or don't get that coffee at Dunkin' because you know you're going to get the donut. Whatever it is, you know what it is that starts this cascade. So there's this concept called a keystone habit.
Hmm.
And are you familiar with that, Jason?
No, I'm not. I'm curious what that is.
A keystone habit, it's a habit that when you do it, it triggers a lot of other good things in your life. For example, some people, it would be waking up at 5:30 in the morning or early in the morning so they can get their meditation in. And when they get their meditation in, they feel like more balanced, so they eat well and they feel more patient, so everything goes better at work and they're able to deal with stress. So their keystone habit there is getting up early, right? So they can do that meditation, which then gives them a great day. Well, sugar for me is the opposite of a keystone habit because it starts a bunch of negative things throughout my day. So I'm just wondering if you have a one thing, Jason, that you have that you kind of know, like once you do it, it's like kind of sets things off in a not so good way.
That's a great question. I mean, I could point to allowing a negative thought to spiral,
Mm.
negative thinking, or
Mm-hmm.
painful thinking, ruminating on past mistakes, ruminating on fears of the future. It's funny to get zen for a moment, I suppose. In the present moment, usually most times all is well. In the present moment, here we are, and I was telling you before we started certain challenges and opportunities I'm facing in my personal life right now, where my mantra sort of right now is meet the moment.
Mm.
How fully can I meet the moment? And so for me, it's the thinking of regrets or ruminations on the past or fears and projections of the future.
Mm.
And those tend to spiral pretty quickly if I don't anchor in presence and anchor in take a breath. What's real here? What's real? What's right in front of you? Can you meet what's right in front of you?
Mm.
And I know that sounds, I don't know, maybe simple, and it's a thing that saves me over and over again when I notice I'm spiraling or starting to get into a negative feedback loop.
It is simple, but it's so important because
Mhm.
once you start that ruminating, then you maybe won't exercise, or you'll snap at your loved one or something because you're stressed. And if you can just really focus on that one thing, then you won't even have to worry about not eating healthily or your relationship. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's
Oh,
why
totally.
these kind of things that might seem indirect to being healthy are really just so crucial.
Yeah, and the other point I think too is it's not about looking at these things in isolation. It's looking at how they affect so many other aspects of our life, as you just detailed, our relationships, our reactions to things, how we handle stress. Can we stay centered and balanced and focused on the things that matter? It's this is these are the things that really have a tremendous ripple effect in our lives, especially if we don't have tools to address them.
Yeah, yeah. But recognizing that how that one thing is just having more of an effect than just that one thing, and it
Hmm.
is important to hopefully galvanizing us to work on that and be really cognizant when it comes up.
Yeah.
So another thing that for me is really important, and studies have shown this can really improve the quality of one's life, is to volunteer.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I know a lot of people are very busy. They have several jobs and children and things like that, but it doesn't mean you have to do it all the time. But studies have shown that it helps you get out in the world, make friends. Gosh, most of my friends come from my volunteering because I've done so much over the years. So I would say that, yep, probably 70% of my close friends are from the various activities I've done to try to make the world a better place. You feel more positive about yourself and your life. You get what's actually called a helper's high, which is that dopamine again, which releases when you do something good. And it's actually really good if you want to be transactional about it. It can be really good on your resume to show that you've done this and that. And it can be fun. For me, it's always fun. I always recommend volunteering for stuff that's fun. And it doesn't have to be a weekly thing, or it can be like we talked about donating blood, which actually can help your health, especially if you're a man, because it will release some of the iron stores that can age you prematurely if you're a man. But if you have kids, you can take them with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like to do a 5K walk where you raise money for some charity that's important to you, or write to your representative. It doesn't have to take a lot of work or consistency. I remember, and I think I've talked about it with you, but it was definitely with Dotsie, where when I was a kid, I read Ann Lander's columns. This was a self-help columnist in the newspapers all around the country. And this man wrote in, he said he was depressed. And Ann Lander said, she's kind of tough on him. She said, go out and help someone else. Because when you're focusing on other people, you don't have time to focus on yourself about how sad you are. And I heard that. I was so shocked that she had that answer. But then I've learned over the years that that's very true. Like no matter what happens in my life, if I've like right now, I volunteer at the dog shelter.
Mm-hmm.
If I've walked the dogs, then I know I've done something good. It's like I've done something that's worthwhile, and it just helps me cope. And I also realize that when I walk dogs and when I do other volunteering is that I'm really present because I have a task, and it's just a finite amount of time that you generally volunteer for, 1 hour, 2 hours. And so it's really healthy also and makes me happy. So I don't know what your relationship is to volunteering, Jason.
Yeah, I've not done it in a moment, to be honest, but the majority of the volunteering I have done has been around feeding houseless individuals. So I've done things in the past with organizations like Food Not Bombs. There was an organization during the pandemic in Los Angeles that was operating called the Martha Project with my friend, Chef Nicole Dersway. And, it was all about making healthy plant-based meals, nutrient-dense plant-based meals, and taking them to displaced houseless individuals. And it's very near and dear to my heart for two reasons. A, because I love the idea of putting really delicious nutrient-dense plant-based food in people's bodies who need that nutrition. And B, to get personal for a moment, my father was actually houseless at the end of his life, and so it always felt like sort of a way to honor that experience and have even deeper compassion and empathy. And the interesting thing, to get not off topic, but I realized that in talking to and interacting with a lot of houseless individuals, not all of them were sort of the pervasive stereotype that, oh, they're drug addicts or they're criminals or they're this or they're that. Some people I talked to, literally, it was just a series of life events that dominoed in a certain way. Those dominoes fell in a specific way, and they found themselves in a situation they never expected to be in. So I say that because it's dangerous for us to make snap judgments about people when they're in a situation like that.
Oh, yeah, you're so right. I remember I started a fund a long time ago at St. Joseph Center, where it was just to give little amounts of money to people who had their car didn't work. So they needed it fixed. Because if their car didn't work, then they couldn't get to work. They would get fired. And that would start this trigger, this terrible, or if they couldn't afford a stove, so they were using an open burner, they could have gotten kicked out of their apartment. So little things can make a huge difference. Making sure that someone has bus fare, these kind of things can make a huge difference in someone's life and stop those, the monument, even being sick can do it. I mean, yeah, you're so right. During the pandemic, I helped with Food Not Bombs. And because we lost so many of our volunteers, I ended up doing it for 16 to 20 hours a week. It was huge. And I was picking up all the food And so it was actually, for me, the pandemic was not an isolating experience, because people like you at the Martha Project and us at Food Not Bombs, we were considered essential workers. So we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have strict rules about having to stay in and all that. I could go anywhere. I had to wear a mask, but yeah, and we could be with other people cooking and things because of that. So yeah, that's one of the benefits of volunteering too, is that interaction.
Yeah.
So the last two I will talk really quickly about, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I put down love. And
Mm.
and it doesn't have to be romantic sexual love. This is very general, but I think that it's sort of following on Ann Lander's advice, is to be happy, to have like feel like you have a higher purpose, taking care of another being, whether it's our pet or our family or our chosen friends, is just really makes life sometimes more stressful and complicated, but overall more purposeful. So, yeah, for me, romantic love has always been really important, but for other people, it might be, taking care of their pet or their parent.
What do you feel like the higher purpose of love is, Alexandra? I'm getting esoteric and
Mm.
philosophical. Like, why do you think we're here to love?
Oh, I guess to because it feels good and is healing for everybody. And I feel like purpose is about making the world a better place. So it's healing for everybody
Mm,
involved, the lover and the lovey.
that's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
So,
Yeah.
and my last one is incredibly what you might think I would say, which is exercise. And for me, exercise has been so important, because I feel like that, once again, the endorphins that happen from exercise have helped me cope. And if I'm feeling sad or not worthy, and I'm not something, I feel like exercise, I've done something good for my body. And I just move through the world with more confidence. And even when I am not in the mood, I do it, because I know that I will feel better afterwards. And you just know, there's never been an exercise session where I have felt worse afterwards. So
Mm.
that's the thing that keeps me coming back.
How do you overcome the resistance? You said, even if I don't feel
Mm,
like it, I'm going to go do it.
yeah.
So what is sort of your self-talk or approach when you identify that resistance? How do you meet it?
I had a client once who, when I was a health coach, who would say, I just didn't feel it when we would talk about how she didn't exercise that week. I just wasn't feeling it. And for me, feelings have nothing to do with it. If you start thinking about your feelings, you're going to get yourself in trouble, because
Yeah.
we often, it's that starting that human biology is resistant to any kind of change of state. So if you're sitting down, there's a resistance to getting up and moving, because you're doing just fine sitting down, you're surviving. So it's very important not to listen to your feelings. um, and I work out in the morning without much, like, I don't have to think about it. Like, it's just like I brush my teeth. And I find that working out in the morning means that it's non-negotiable. There's nothing that can get in the way, because it's the morning
Hmm.
early, and I don't have an excuse of, I have a dinner to go to, or, yeah. So no questioning involved. Do I feel like it? Do I feel tired? How do I feel? No, you just go.
No negotiation.
No.
Okay.
What about
Okay.
you? How do you do it? Because I know sometimes you say that it's hard for you to do it, especially if emotionally a lot of stuff's going on in your life.
That's this moment. I'm meeting a lot of change in my life, a lot of transformation and some chaos. And, it's one of those things where, especially on the days where I'm, have a sick dog at the vet today and and there's all these stressors. It's like, how am I going to fit this in? And, what I remind myself, Alexandra, is I don't have to be my strongest, most perfect self today. I don't. I don't have
Mhm.
to put that pressure on it. So if I am only going to do 3 sets of push-ups and some curls and some shoulder presses, I will do them to the best of my ability instead of comparing it, which is very difficult at times for me, comparing it to the last workout session where like I was on fire and I felt so strong and da da da. So for me, it's addressing my inner taskmaster and inner perfectionist who think that every single time I've got to do it to, it's got to be a 10 out of 10. It's not
Mm,
realistic. It's just not realistic.
right. Yeah. No, I have a friend who says give 100% of your 20%. If you only have 20% to give, just give 100% of that. I find too that having an appointment with myself, planning the day before when I'm going to go to the gym helps me because then I show up. It's like it's in my calendar.
Hmm.
And that
Hmm.
helps instead of waiting to when I quote unquote feel like going to the gym. Mm-mm.
See, now on this, I need to find out an optimal window. And I say optimal window because I tend to have the most energy midday to afternoon. That's like my peak
Mhm.
where I'm jamming. The creative ideas are flowing. I feel a lot of vibrance and energy. But typically, that window of the day is full of work and full of focusing on projects and things like that. So I've been doing like a 4:30 p.m. and that's been good for me. But the difficulty is depending on what happens during the day, I might arrive at that 4:30 p.m. mark and be like, oh, oh God, where's the energy going to come from?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm considering maybe playing with time of day and seeing how that affects it.
Yeah, that would be interesting because I think everybody is different. They have found that people who work out in the morning generally are more consistent because things don't get in the way
Mm,
at 7 a.m. as much. Your life is more ordered in the beginning of the day and then it just can devolve.
right.
So, yeah. And sometimes the evening is best for people when they can make that time. But yeah, I pretty much say, I act like if somebody says, can we have a call at this time? I generally going back to saying no, I say no. And I don't need to feel like I need to give it a reason. The reason is that I do the things I do in the morning or take care of my mother and I take care of myself by exercising. And
Hmm.
so I just say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it at that time.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Good boundary setting. Good example. Leading by example, Alexandra. That's phenomenal. I wanted to leave a final addendum to the five that you shared that I think is important, and I will say this is something that I'm really focusing on right now is the nature and the quality of the relationships in my life, the
Mm.
people that I choose to surround myself with, the people that I choose to focus energy and invest in. And this can be a challenging thing because there are so many complicated dynamics when it comes to family and friends, business associates, lovers, spouses, siblings, you name it. And I say this because it is easier to say than it is to practice sometimes, but I had a realization recently that I'm investing in certain people in my life that I love. It's not for lack of love, but it's the energetic investment in spending too much time with people or not having healthy boundaries with them, not standing in my sovereignty, where I don't know that they're the healthiest energetic imprint for me to have around. And what I mean by that is people who are negative or focused on scarcity or people who complain all the time. I'm realizing that I want to be around more positivity and possibility and the people who are, yes, not bypassing, they're processing their emotions. They're dealing with the challenges and the pain and the grief of life. It's not to say they're bypassing, but to have a sort of attitude toward life of, yeah, we're going to figure this out. Somehow everything's going to be okay and it's going to be wonderful. And I'm just taking stock of the quality and the nature of the relationships in my life because I really feel like if we surround ourselves with, negative, small-minded people, judgmental people, people who are stuck in repeated patterns of sort of victimhood, it's really challenging to move forward and become the fullest version of ourselves if we have a lot of people in our life like that.
Oh, that's so true. I've heard that your life is the sum of the five people you're closest to.
Hmm.
So that really has an effect on your life. And it's important that we set boundaries. And so that's a really good piece of advice. Thank you.
Yeah, we get to speak our truth over and over and over again. We get an innumerable number of chances to do that in our life, don't we?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, this has been a great episode as always, Alexandra. It's always wonderful to share space with you and dive deep into these topics. And for you, dear listener, dear fan of Switch for Good podcast, if you have not yet sought out our resources on our website, you can go to switchforgood.org. That's the numeral 4, switchforgood.org. We have a fantastic blog, great recipe section, guest posts. You can find links to the podcast there. And in terms of the podcast, if you want to catch up on any of our previous episodes, I think we just crested over 320 episodes now, Alexandra?
Yeah, I think this is 321, actually.
Wowzers.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear about any of the previous episodes that we've mentioned, it's all on all the podcatchers out there. And then, of course, we're on all of the social media channels, sharing the latest research, resources, and recipes to help you thrive on a dairy-free, plant-based diet and optimize your lifestyle. So check us out on Instagram. We have a very robust YouTube channel. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook. You can catch us everywhere. We're growing. We're expanding. We're taking down the dairy industry. We're helping people thrive on a plant-based diet. We're doing it, Alexander. We're doing it well.
Yay.
So thanks for listening, everyone. And we will catch you next week with another episode of the Switch for Good podcast.